A scarred dog saved a boy's life, and the town called him dangerous. Behind that rush to judgment stood a man like Royce Maddox, who used pain for profit and silence to stay hidden. But a veteran named Daniel saw what no one else did and followed the truth into places others were too afraid to look. But just wait until you see how this story turns and why justice, in the end, didn't just bark, but bit back. The Boggs sat in the farthest corner of the county shelter's intake wing, half in shadow, where the buzzing overhead light flickered every few seconds like a faulty pulse. The air smelled of disinfectant and damp cardboard, a mixture meant to clean away whatever stories these walls couldn't hold. Rows of metal kennels lined the corridor, each holding a shape of need. Some barked, some whimpered, a few performed. The cute tail waggers, the perfect golden retrievers, the kind that came with cheerful eye contact and names like Buddy or Princess written on laminated cards. But not this one. His cage was marked with a crooked handwritten sign that didn't offer charm or comfort, only a warning. Caution, one-eyed, history unknown. The words hung like a sentence. People passed him quickly. They slowed just long enough to see the dog's right eye, clouded over, with a ghost-white scar slicing through the iris like a tear that had never healed right. The rest of him was lean, tense, wrapped in short brown fur that had grown over old wounds. His posture wasn't aggressive, but it wasn't welcoming either. He didn't approach the bars. He didn't bark for attention. He simply watched. A teenage boy in a varsity hoodie stopped in front of the kennel and squinted. "That one's creepy," he said, before his mother tugged him away by the shoulder. "Come on," she murmured, avoiding the dog's gaze. "Let's look at something less damaged." The dog didn't flinch. He just lowered his head a little further, like a soldier ducking the weight of another day. And then a man appeared. He didn't speak. He didn't move fast. He just stood there longer than anyone else had. Daniel Brooks was 36, with a broad frame and a face built from sharp edges softened by exhaustion. His short-cropped hair had started to gray near the temples, and the faded army jacket he wore had more meaning than style. There was something in the way he stood, straight-backed, heels aligned, hands clasped in front, that said discipline, even if his eyes looked like they were carrying something heavy. He had been to places most people only saw in the background of news broadcasts, and now, years later, he lived in a one-bedroom rental on the edge of Hickory Ridge, Ohio, a town quiet enough to let the old memories creep in uninvited. His VA counselor had used words like adjustment and integration. She'd recommended structure, routine, maybe a hobby. Daniel didn't want a hobby. He wanted quiet. But sometimes silence made more noise than anything else. That's what brought him here. The shelter manager, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair tied in a bun, approached with a clipboard and the kind of tired eyes that had seen too many endings and not enough good starts. "Grace Avery," she said, extending a hand. "You looking for a companion?" "I'm looking," Daniel said simply. His voice was low but steady. Grace glanced at the cage. "That one came in last week. No microchip, no collar. Found wandering near the edge of town, between the quarry and the freight yard. Pretty beat up. He startles easy. Doesn't respond well to men, especially sudden movement." She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Honestly, most folks don't get past the eye. Some say he gives them the creeps." Daniel knelt down slowly, bringing himself to the dog's level. The animal didn't retreat. He didn't growl. He simply held still, watching, the way a man watches a doorframe for movement. "Unpredictable," Daniel echoed softly, not to Grace but more to himself. Or just tired of being judged by the worst 5 minutes of his life. Grace didn't answer right away. Then she gave a dry chuckle. "You sound like someone who's been there." Daniel didn't look up. "Yeah," he said, "I know the feeling." The dog blinked his good eye. His ears stayed flat, his tail motionless, but his body wasn't tense. Just wary.
like he knew the terms of survival better than trust. "Can I walk him?" Daniel asked. Grace hesitated for a second. Then she handed him a simple leash, rubber-gripped and well-worn. "You'll want to go slow. He's watchful." They stepped into the small fenced yard behind the shelter. The sky was overcast, the kind of gray that made everything feel still. The dog didn't bolt. He didn't sniff or explore like others did. Instead, he moved in slow arcs, pacing in measured circles, his eyes never leaving the gate, his ears tuned to distant sounds. He wasn't walking, he was studying, watching shadows, measuring escape routes, like a man trained to map exits in unfamiliar territory. Then a sound changed the air. A white Ford F-150 rolled down the alley beside the shelter. The truck's bumper was dented on the passenger side. It didn't stop. It just passed, slow and unremarkable. But the dog froze. Not bark, not growl. He froze the way a man freezes when he hears something he recognizes but doesn't want to. His muscles went stiff under the fur. Every part of him focused. A thin, high whistle cut through the wind, barely audible, more like a tone than a sound. The dog's body shuddered. His front paw lifted a fraction off the ground. Not fear, not pain. Conditioning. Daniel saw it, noticed it like a landmine in the sand. And he didn't speak. He just memorized the moment. Later, back inside, as he signed the adoption paperwork, Grace watched him with a strange look, somewhere between hope and worry. "I hope he's the right fit for you," she said quietly. "He's had a rough go. You can tell. I'm not sure he knows how to be a pet." Daniel looked up from the clipboard. "He doesn't have to be a pet." Grace frowned. "Then what is he?" Daniel gave a small, tired smile. "He's someone who made it through." He paused, then glanced over at the dog, who sat by the door, ears alert, body still, just wary, like he knew the terms of survival better than trust. "Can I walk him?" Daniel asked. Grace hesitated for a second. Then she handed him a simple leash, rubber-gripped and well-worn. "He's watchful." They stepped into the small fenced yard behind the shelter. The sky was overcast, the kind of gray that made everything feel still. The dog didn't bolt. He didn't sniff or explore like others did. Instead, he moved in slow arcs, pacing in measured circles, his eyes never leaving the gate, his ears tuned to distant sounds. He wasn't walking, he was studying, watching shadows, measuring escape routes, like a man trained to map exits in unfamiliar territory. Then a sound changed the air. A white Ford F-150 rolled down the alley beside the shelter. The truck's bumper was dented on the passenger side. It didn't stop, it just passed, slow and unremarkable. But the dog froze. Not bark, not growl. He froze the way a man freezes when he hears something he recognizes but doesn't want to. His muscles went stiff under the fur. Every part of him focused. A thin, high whistle cut through the wind, barely audible, more like a tone than a sound. The dog's body shuddered. His front paw lifted a fraction off the ground. Not fear, not pain. Conditioning. Daniel saw it, noticed it like a landmine in the sand. And he didn't speak. He just memorized the moment. Later, back inside, as he signed the adoption paperwork, Grace watched him with a strange look, somewhere between hope and worry. "I hope he's the right fit for you," she said quietly. "He's had a rough go. You can tell. I'm not sure he knows how to be a pet." Daniel looked up from the clipboard. "He doesn't have to be a pet." Grace frowned. "Then what is he?" Daniel gave a small, tired smile. "He's someone who made it through." He paused, then glanced over at the dog, who sat by the door, ears alert, body still. But he didn't look back. They didn't need to. They had already seen enough.
Scout didn't speak, didn't beg, didn't whimper. But over time, he began to listen with a kind of precision that was startling. He studied Daniel's life like it was a language he'd once known and was trying hard to remember. Every shift of Daniel's footsteps across the wood floor, every cupboard creak, every sigh from the coffee machine became part of a silent map he carried in his head. By the second week, Scout knew the sound of the deadbolt turning and the click of Daniel's keychain before it landed in the bowl by the door. He knew the rustle of the couch blanket meant it was evening, and that the whistle of the old kettle, particularly that thin, metallic pitch near the boil, meant he should find somewhere quiet and low to curl up as far from the stove as possible. That sound always made his tail lower, his ears pull tight against his head. Daniel noticed. The dog never barked. He slept beside the couch, never on it. When Daniel invited him onto the cushion one rainy evening, Scout placed a single paw on the upholstery and then pulled it back, like a soldier refusing an earned privilege. Instead, he made a place for himself on the braided rug, just close enough to feel the warmth of Daniel's presence, but not close enough to impose. At night, when thunder cracked across the fields, Scout would crawl under the kitchen table, body rigid, spine low, muscles tight as if waiting for orders. He never cried out. He just waited it out in silence, eyes wide, trembling, but focused, like fear wasn't something to express, but to endure. Daniel understood that look. One night during a late spring storm, the thunder hit hard enough to rattle the window pane. Scout flinched violently and didn't move again for a full 5 minutes. Daniel stepped down onto the floor beside him, hands slow and empty. He placed one hand gently on the dog's shoulder and began to breathe, long, even breaths, measured in counts, like they taught him in the field when the world outside the tent was chaos and inside, a heartbeat could mean everything. Scout stayed still, but he listened, and that was enough. In the neighborhood, the story was less tender. Daniel's block was lined with modest 2-story homes, manicured lawns, and porch flags that changed with the seasons. People liked order, they liked safety, and most of all, they liked stories that made sense. Scout didn't make sense. His eye made people uncomfortable. His silence unnerved them more than barking ever could. At the mailboxes, a woman in gym clothes whispered to her neighbor, "That's the guy with the weird dog." They both nodded, as if it explained everything. When Daniel walked Scout down Hadley Street, parents subtly placed themselves between their kids and the sidewalk. Conversations quieted, windows reflected sideways glances. The scar did what all scars do. It told the loudest version of a story no one took time to learn. It was on a Sunday, warm, wind-brushed, and deceptively peaceful, that everything changed. Hadley Park was full of families that afternoon. Children ran between picnic tables and swatted at bubbles. Dogs strained at leashes toward ice cream trucks and squirrels. Daniel brought Scout because he thought the open air might ease the tension in the dog's shoulders. It was a test, for both of them. Scout stayed close. He watched everything. The muscle along his jaw twitched each time a stroller squeaked or car honked in the distance. Still, he walked with Daniel's pace, never pulling, never disobeying. The leash was a formality, not a restraint. Then it happened. A little boy, 5, maybe 6, slipped free from his mother's hand. A red balloon, bobbing wildly in the breeze, bounced across the grass and headed toward the street. The boy gave chase with that joyful recklessness only children possess. His name, Evan, came sharp and panicked from his mother's throat, but she was too far. A white F-150 idled near the curb, dented bumper, tinted windows, engine rumbling low. Then, that sound. A whistle, high and precise, a note that cut through everything else, sharp as a blade hidden in velvet. Scout went still, his body locked, and then he moved. Not toward the truck, not toward the danger, but toward the child. With a speed Daniel hadn't seen before, Scout lunged across the grass and clamped his teeth, not on skin, not on flesh, but on the fabric of the boy's hoodie. One sharp tug. The boy stumbled backwards and landed hard on the grass, wide-eyed, crying, but safe. Safe and 3 feet from where the truck had started to inch forward. But no one saw that part. They saw a big dog with a damaged eye dragging a child to the ground. Phones came up. Voices rose. Someone screamed, "Get that dog away from him!"
The F-150 drove off, no plate visible, no driver seen. In less than 5 minutes, the world rewrote itself. The man from Animal Control arrived with practice steps and a fixed expression. Carl Benton had been doing this job long enough to believe in neat conclusions. To him, danger came in forms you could check off on a list: size, breed, temperament. And if something didn't fit neatly, you still contained it, for everyone's safety. That was the phrase he always used. It made things easier to say. He carried a catch-pole and wore a belt full of tags. Daniel stepped forward, hands open, calm but firm. "This dog didn't attack anyone," he said. "He pulled a kid out of the road. He didn't bite him. There's no blood, no mark. You can check the hoodie. It's wet with slobber, not blood." Benton didn't even look at the hoodie. His eyes went straight to Scout's face, to the scar. The decision landed silently, like a door being shut. The boy's mother, pale and shaken, couldn't say for certain what she had seen, only what she had feared. And in that fear, the truth got smaller. Benton took out a citation pad and began writing. "There'll be a hearing," he said, his tone almost apologetic. "Possibly a designation as a dangerous animal. Don't bring him to public spaces until then. For everyone's safety," he added. Daniel said nothing, but inside, something cracked. Not violently, not loudly, just enough to let heat in. He'd heard that phrase too many times in too many places where compassion had been replaced with protocols. Contain the problem, remove the threat, keep the world clean and quiet. Only the world wasn't clean or quiet, not where it mattered. Grace Avery had followed the commotion from the edge of the park. She moved through the crowd with quick, precise steps and caught Daniel's eye as the crowd began to thin. "Keep him calm," she said softly, placing a hand gently on his arm. "And don't miss the hearing. These things get ugly fast." Daniel nodded, jaw set. He opened the car door, and Scout climbed in without hesitation, curling on the floorboard the way he always did when things didn't feel safe. As they drove, Daniel kept one hand steady on the steering wheel. With the other, he reached down. Scout pressed his scarred head into Daniel's palm, slow and certain, like a soldier filing his after-action report. He didn't understand what he'd done wrong, only that the world had turned cold again, and the judgment had come fast. Daniel looked at the road ahead. Familiar heat rose in his chest, the kind that didn't explode, but burned steady. The kind he'd learned to turn into focus. And somewhere in the quiet car, the shape of a decision began to form. A line had been crossed, and this time, Daniel wouldn't look the other way.
The hearing circled Daniel's mind like a slow-moving storm, always there, always building. It reminded him of the checkpoints he used to face overseas, the kind where you never knew if the next 10 seconds would be quiet or defining. Only this time, the judgment wasn't coming from a foreign uniform. It was coming from his own neighbors. Outside, the world moved as if nothing was wrong. Lawn sprinklers hissed on timers. Wind chimes clinked against screen doors. But inside his rental home, everything felt heavy. The town wasn't waiting for the hearing to cast its vote. On social media, truth became currency, and fear sold faster. A single close-up photo of Scout, head lowered, scarred eye visible, fur darkened by shadow, had made its way onto a local Facebook group. The caption read, "Would you let this animal near your child?" Comments followed, fast, harsh, confident. "That dog looks broken, dangerous. I don't care what the guy says, some dogs just aren't worth the risk. What kind of man brings a dog like that around kids?" The likes piled up, quick and thoughtless, like kindling tossed into a fire no one intended to put out. The story had been rewritten without context, without questions. Scout wasn't a protector anymore. He was a threat. And Daniel, he was the man who had allowed that threat into public. It was a familiar kind of judgment, the kind he'd learned to stop explaining a long time ago. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep, so he cleaned. He wiped the kitchen counters, lined up utensils, scrubbed beneath the faucet. The rhythm helped, but his mind kept circling back to one sound, the whistle.
The one from the park. It had sliced through the air like something meant to trigger, not signal. He began mimicking it absent-mindedly under his breath, adjusting the pitch, drawing it thinner, sharper, shorter. Just sound, just air. Most of the time, Scout didn't respond, but when Daniel hit a very specific frequency, high, narrow, unnatural, Scout flinched. Not a small reaction. His body recoiled violently, claws scraping the linoleum as he backed up into the corner, tail low, ears pinned. No bark, no growl, just raw memory rising through muscle. Daniel froze. He lowered himself to one knee and softened his voice. "Okay," he whispered, not as an owner, but as a medic again, one who'd seen trauma settled beep past language. He didn't reach for Scout. He just stayed close, breathing evenly, letting the silence settle around them again like a bandage over something that hadn't finished healing. Later that morning, Daniel pulled an old shoebox from the back of his bedroom closet. It was weathered from years of moving and sitting unopened. Inside were photos, folded documents, and handwritten field notes from his second deployment, back when he'd worked alongside a K-9 unit in northern Iraq. Some of the notes weren't meant for civilians. They were full of short, clipped terms: stimulus conditioning, response training, code whistle tones. He remembered one particular entry: high-frequency triggers, short commands, used in silent ops or worse, coercion environments. Watch for reactivity. He read until the words blurred. It wasn't just theory, it was a pattern. And now it had a face. At 3:17 a.m., unable to sit still any longer, Daniel zipped up his jacket, pulled his hood low, and walked the town. He passed shuttered storefronts and mailboxes soaked in dew. On a hunch, he turned towards Maple and 6th, two streets that met near a rusting warehouse strip most people forgot about. There, behind a shuttered auto body shop with a boarded front and no security lights, he spotted what looked like fresh tire tracks veering into a narrow alley. He followed them on foot. The alley curved behind the shop to a fence wrapped in chain link, topped with barbed wire, except one section had been clipped. The wire bent clean outward, not old or rusted, just recent, intentional. He ducked through. Beyond the fence sat a cinder block storage bay with a wide metal door rolled halfway open. Inside, the air changed, cooler, staler, and underneath the chemical tang of motor oil and bleach, something darker lingered. In the far corner, surrounded by warped plywood and old pallets, was a pit. Shallow, dug roughly, ringed by scuffed boards. Not a place for repairs, not a place for anything legal. Daniel didn't take photos. He didn't touch anything. He stood still, felt the hairs rise along his neck, and let the gravity of what he was seeing settle fully. Then he turned and left. Back home, he sat on the couch until the sun cracked the blinds. At 7 a.m., he picked up the phone and called the sheriff's office. "Deputy Moore, please," he said. Lydia Moore had been on the force for over a decade, a practical woman, not prone to dramatics. She was the kind who issued warnings instead of tickets, especially when she saw a worn VA tag on a driver's mirror and knew what that meant. When she picked up, Daniel's voice was calm but direct. He told her what he'd found, described the alley, the cut fence, the pit, the smell. He told her about the whistle, about Scout's reaction, about the F-150. Moore didn't interrupt. She just listened. Then she said, "Dogfighting?" "Or training," Daniel replied. "I'm not sure yet. But someone's using that whistle to control animals. And when one of them didn't play along, when one of them acted outside the script, they tried to get rid of him. You have names." "I have a truck," Daniel said. "White F-150, passenger side dented. Same from the park. I don't have proof, but I've got a guess where it leads." Moore paused. Her voice lowered. "You're saying animal control is covering for them?" "I'm saying Officer Benton had his decision made before he ever looked at the facts. And you think he's connected? I think, Daniel said carefully, someone wants Scout gone fast, and I think it's someone who understands what that dog survived. Another pause. Then Moore's voice shifted, sharper now, with purpose. All right, but don't go back there, she said. Let me do my job. The morning of the hearing arrived wrapped in gray clouds and heavy air. Daniel had been up for hours. He laid out Scout's adoption paperwork, vet evaluations, photos. He placed Evan's hoodie, the one Scout had grabbed, in a plastic evidence bag, still bearing faint dog saliva but no sign of tearing. No bite marks, no blood. Just proof. Proof that was too easy to overlook if you weren't willing to see the whole story. At 8 a.m., as Daniel reached for the front doorknob, there was a knock. He opened the door to find Deputy Moore standing on the porch. Her uniform was pressed, one hand on her radio. In the other, she held a printed still from traffic camera footage. "We pulled footage from the park entrance," she said. She handed him the image. It showed the white F-150, passenger side dented, plate obscured with what looked like road dirt or deliberate smearing. In the passenger seat, a shadowed figure raised something to their mouth. "This your whistle," Moore said quietly. "That truck belongs to a man named Royce Maddox, owns the auto shop off Maple. We've got a search warrant. My team's already en route." Daniel's grip tightened slightly. "And the hearing?" Moore's jaw flexed. "Benton says protocol is protocol. He's not backing down." She exhaled through her nose. "But if what we find is what I think we'll find, then the truth is going to speak louder than his process." Daniel nodded once. There was no relief in his face. Not yet. Only focus. Because the real work was just beginning.
The hearing room at the Hickory Ridge Municipal Building was as unremarkable as a waiting room in a bus terminal. The chairs didn't match. The carpet was frayed at the corners. A whiteboard on the far wall still carried the faint traces of last night's ESL lesson, half-erased conjugations, and someone's attempt at the word consequence. There were no flags, no fanfare, just a long folding table and a series of metal-framed chairs that made you sit straighter than you wanted to. Daniel walked in without ceremony. He wore a clean shirt, plain slacks, and a jacket that still carried the soft crease from the back of a closet. Scout walked beside him on a short leash, calm but alert, his scarred eye cloudy in the morning light, the other sharp as glass. The leash wasn't about control, it was about reassurance, for both of them. At the front table, Officer Carl Benton sat with a binder thick enough to hold years of caution. His uniform was crisp, his posture straight, his expression carefully neutral, the kind of face that made it clear he had already made up his mind, but was willing to wait for everyone else to catch up. In the back row sat Grace Avery, hands folded tightly in her lap, lips pressed into a line that had no room for hope or fear, only waiting. Across the room, two mothers leaned toward one another in their seats, whispering, watching. They didn't look at Daniel directly, but he felt it anyway. The quiet verdicts passed between glances. Scout sat at Daniel's heel, unmoving. The hearing was called to order. A moderator with a name tag too small to read gave the usual disclaimers about public safety, about due process, about protocol. Then Daniel stood and spoke. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He just told the story the way he told stories in another lifetime. Briefings delivered with precision, tone held in check, heart restrained, not because it wasn't there, but because the truth didn't need decoration. He held up the plastic evidence bag containing the boy's hoodie, pointed to the fibers, stretched but not torn, damp but clean, no punctures, no injury, just proof that something had happened and something hadn't. "I don't ask you to believe my opinion," Daniel said, voice steady. "Just believe the facts." He didn't look at the mothers, or at Benton. He looked at Scout. The dog didn't move, but his ears turned toward the sound of Daniel's voice.
Then Benton cleared his throat, clicked his pen once, and spoke like someone rehearsing procedure, not seeking understanding. "Intent," he said flatly, "is what matters here. A dog that clamps a child, regardless of outcome, has demonstrated a capacity for escalation. That's what we're here to assess." And then the door opened. Every head turned. Deputy Lydia Moore stepped into the room, flanked by two other officers. One walked just ahead of her, a man in handcuffs between them, grease under his fingernails, dried sweat at his collar, and a bruise forming along the ridge of his jaw. Behind them, another deputy carried a plastic bin. Inside were plywood squares stained with old fluids, a rusted chain coiled like a snake, a plastic bottle labeled with something veterinary, and a metal whistle dangling from a short cord. Moore didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. She addressed the moderator first, then the room. "For the record," she began, "we executed a search warrant this morning at a property known as Maddox Auto Storage, located at the corner of Maple and 6th. Inside, we discovered a pit used for illegal animal fights, a number of unregistered veterinary substances, and a ledger detailing cash bets. The man you see here, Royce Maddox, was found on site. He attempted to flee. He was apprehended." She paused, lifting a file folder and sliding a photo onto the table. "We also located a white Ford F-150 with a dented front bumper, the same vehicle seen on municipal traffic footage near Hadley Park. The footage confirms this individual using this," she held up the whistle, "to issue sound triggers designed to elicit trained responses from animals." Moore turned her gaze to Daniel. "There's more," she said. "We found a plywood panel inside the storage bay. Burned into it was a brand, 3 short lines arranged like a crown. When your dog saw it, he froze. Then he lay down and covered his head. That's not fear. That's submission. Conditioned behavior. We've seen it before in animals trained under pressure." The room shifted, like a tide pulling back. The mothers in the back fell silent. The moderator leaned forward. Even the chair Benton sat seemed to creak under the weight of the moment. Benton tapped the table once, twice, then spoke again, carefully. "Deputy," he said, his voice more formal now, "this hearing concerns a specific incident involving a child and a dog." Moore didn't flinch. "And this is about that dog," she replied, "because we also recovered doorbell camera footage from a neighbor across the street from the park. It shows the child stepping into the street, chasing a balloon. The F-150 begins to roll forward. The whistle is heard. And this dog," she gestured to Scout, "pulls the child backward by the sleeve and places himself between the child and the oncoming vehicle. The truck accelerates. The dog remains." The silence that followed wasn't passive. It was active, thick with awareness, with shift. Benton's pen stopped clicking. His jaw tensed. His voice, when it came, was quieter. "Given new evidence," he said, "I withdraw the recommendation for designation. The case is closed." The moderator nodded, recorded the statement. From the back of the room came the faintest exhale. Grace Avery, hands loosening, her breath catching like a string finally cut loose from a knot. Daniel didn't move for a second. Then he reached down. Scout, still calm, leaned into his knee, not pushing, not jumping, just placing his weight there like an anchor. And for the first time, the dog closed his good eye for a brief moment, as if he'd been waiting not for approval, not for praise, but for something deeper, a signal that, this time, the pack had chosen right.
Didn't sweep through Hickory Ridge overnight. It moved the way all meaningful change does, in hesitant waves, rippling outward from small moments of clarity. At first, there was silence, as if the town wasn't quite sure how to reframe the story it had told itself about a dog with a scarred eye and the man who walked beside him. Then, one morning, something shifted. Evan's mother, who had once stood frozen with fear in Hadley Park, wrote a post online that didn't go viral but went far enough. It began with something most people struggle to write, a public apology. She wrote about the moment she thought her son had been attacked and how her own fear had painted the dog as a monster. She wrote about the footage, the truth, and the man who had stood alone in that hearing room defending a dog the town had labeled dangerous. And she ended with a photograph. Little Evan sitting cross-legged on Daniel's porch, holding out a carrot with both hands while Scout, gentle and calm, took it with the delicate care of a creature who now understood that kindness could be safe. The comments that followed were different this time. Cautious at first, then warmer. Didn't expect to cry this morning. That dog saved a child. That scar isn't the whole story. He's not dangerous, he's brave. The scar across Scout's eye didn't disappear, but something else began to change. The way people looked at it, the way they looked at him, and maybe, just a little, the way they looked at themselves. At the shelter, someone quietly took down the old handwritten sign that had hung over Scout's kennel for weeks, the one that read, "Caution, one-eyed, history unknown." In its place, a new note was penned in neat handwriting. "Give me time to trust you." Royce Maddox, the man behind the truck and the ring, made the front page of the local paper, not for a business deal or community donation, but for the reasons men dread: betrayal of trust, cruelty exposed, and a long list of charges that carried no place to hide. He didn't fight it. Some men are brave under pressure. Others fold when the light finds them. Maddox folded quickly. He'd paid cash for strays, chosen the ones no one would ask about. He kept records only when it served him and burned anything that didn't. When Scout escaped his cycle, when the wrong dog survived with the wrong kind of memory, Maddox tried to erase the witness. And he hadn't acted alone. Officer Carl Benton, the man who clicked his pen more than he listened, had helped. Through silence, through procedure, through the kind of disinterest that protects the powerful. He didn't raise a hand, but he made sure no one else did either. He lost his job. There were hearings for him, too. He sat in a room just like the one Daniel had stood in. Under those same flickering lights, he learned what it felt like when a town stops nodding politely and starts asking why. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was justice in a steady voice. One afternoon not long after, Deputy Lydia Moore stopped by Daniel's house with a clipboard and a warm smile. She scratched Scout behind the ears, and for once Scout didn't flinch. He leaned into her hand with the easy weight of earned trust. "You ever think about certifying him?" she asked, offering the stack of forms. "He already reads you like a book. Might as well make it official." Daniel looked down at Scout, who tilted his head as if asking the same question. So they did it. The classes weren't simple, but Scout took to them with quiet focus. He wasn't trained again. He was rewritten. One lesson at a time, he learned how to live in a world that had once taught him all the wrong things. By autumn, Scout had a new role. Every Tuesday morning, Daniel and Scout visited the local VA clinic. They didn't make speeches. They didn't fix anyone. But Scout would lie beside the boots of veterans who didn't know how to talk about their nights or who hadn't slept through one in years. He didn't need to understand war to understand silence. He simply stayed, present, grounded, warm. A living weight that said, "I'm here too." And somehow, that was enough. Because a scar doesn't decide the future. It just marks where the healing began. On a cool, wind-brushed November evening, Daniel took Scout back to the county shelter, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. The shelter was holding an adoption fair. It wasn't for Scout. He already had a home. He went to stand with the ones still waiting, the overlooked, the judged, the misread. Daniel sat on the concrete next to a senior pit mix with cropped ears and eyes too tired to hope,
and he watched as families wandered between the kennels, paper cups of cider warming their hands, laughter trailing behind Todvins and coats. A small girl in a bright pink jacket stopped in front of Scout. She studied him with the kind of curiosity only children still trust. "Mister," she asked, pointing gently, "what happened to his eye?" Daniel smiled, softly, not sadly. "He fought to protect someone smaller than him," he answered. "No embellishment, just the truth." The girl nodded, like that made perfect sense. "That's what heroes do," she said solemnly. Then she reached out a small, steady palm. Scout leaned forward, sniffed gently, and gave one polite lick. It was enough. On the walk home, Daniel noticed how the town sounded different now. The hiss of the milk truck making its early drop-offs, the warm bell above the bakery door, and off in the distance, a high-pitched whistle floating across someone's backyard, where a child tried to teach a young dog to sit, then burst into laughter when the dog flopped instead. Scout's pace matched Daniel's stride. When a car backfired 2 blocks away, Scout flinched just once, but then turned his head not with panic, but with expectation. He waited for Daniel's cue. Daniel gave it. He breathed in, slow and full, then out. He counted, the way a medic once taught him in a place far away. 1 breath at a time. Scout steady. And so did he. The story they shared made its way through Hickory Ridge in the way real stories do, changed in the retelling, trimmed at the edges, but holding tight to its core. The facts became a kind of folklore, and eventually parents would point to the spot in Hadley Park and tell their kids. That's where a dog with 1 eye saved a boy, because one man saw something the rest of us missed. The lesson wasn't complicated. It didn't need to be. It was in the way Daniel didn't flinch from a scar, in the way Scout stood between a child and danger even when the world didn't believe in him. It was in the shelter manager who still hoped, the deputy who chose truth over appearances, and the town that, slowly, imperfectly, learned to apologize and mean it. They weren't perfect, but they were something better. They were witnesses. 2 beings, broken in different ways, who fit together like puzzle pieces made from pain, silence, and hard-earned trust. They made a life out of bad evidence. And when strangers looked at Scout, at the eye that once made people pull their children away, they didn't just see a scar anymore. They saw a guardian. And when they looked again, that second look always landed softer. Because finally, the town had learned to see not with fear, but with recognition, with memory, with grace.